Hello, Nicole. Welcome.
Hello. I'm so glad to be here. Yay.
I made sure just in case you start showing your food photos, I ate before before you and I were talking.
Oh yeah, this is definitely food photography heavy. So if all those out here, if it's I know it's lunchtime out where I am, so I'm gonna be eating like right after, thank goodness.
Awesome. So,
Cool.
what do you have for us today?
All right. So, I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen and just kind of get right to it if that's all right with you.
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay. I have a mini presentation and then I'll get into doing some editing here. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Nicole. I'm a photographer. I live in Oregon. I actually live out in the country in Oregon. I moved out in the country about 6 months ago. I'm a photography educator. That's my full-time job. I create photos and I teach about photography and post-processing. So today I am going to discuss food photography. And for those of you who do know me, I have done a lot of food photography. I have a few books out there on food photography. But today I'm kind of focusing on using your phone as your food photography camera. So I'm going to give some general tips on food photography because the photography itself, the lighting, the composition, everything is exactly the same regardless of which camera you're using. And I'm specifically going to talk about using a mobile phone and portrait mode because I love, and like this photo you can see here, I use portrait mode to create this photo and it just does a really good job of blurring that background. And then I'm also going to jump into Luminar to show you how you can quickly make these photos just kind of go from what they look pretty good now, but taking them into Luminar, you can do a lot of really great things very quickly. And I really like Luminar for my food photography. So why use a phone for food photography? Obviously, for my kind of professional photos, I would say the finger quote around the professional photos, right? I do a lot of stuff with my Fujifilm cameras or whatever my SLR or mirrorless camera is. But I also like to go out to eat. I like to cook at home. And sometimes I just want to get a really quick photo of what what was served to me. And I like to do this because I live in a really small town now and it's fun to kind of help boost up the local businesses. So I try to get some really great food photos with my phone that I can share on either Yelp or Google reviews or wherever, that will kind of help them kind of boost their presence. And especially in times now, I know restaurants are having a hard time. So any little thing that I can do to help. And it's also a good way to kind of sketch photos and get some really great ideas for my like real food photography that I would do at home. So I like to do that. And of course, I love to create photos. So if I have something really pretty in front of me, it's hard to not photograph it, right? So food photography tips. The biggest thing with food photography, in my opinion, is going to be your lighting. If lighting is bad, it's just not going to look appetizing because food photography is more than just the picture. It's not just a landscape or a portrait. You have to look at a photo and go, "Ooh, that looks really delicious. I want to eat that." The best compliment people give me with my food photos is when someone tells me that my photo made them hungry. So you want your photos to look appetizing. So diffused sunlight is probably going to be your absolute best, or any type of diffused white light, if it's maybe artificial lighting, you kind of want to avoid tungsten or yellow lighting, overhead lights in restaurants, for example. If I'm in a restaurant and it's dark and dim and my food might look beautiful, the presentation might look great, but if the light is yellow and orange, then I probably will just not even try to photograph it if it's something I wanted to share it, for example. So I usually just avoid that. If you have the chance to sit next to a window, you'll get some really great, usually you're going to get some good diffused light coming in there. Try to backlight or side light your food as much as possible. It's just a really pleasing way to kind of add a lot of depth to your photo. Front lighting is not bad, but it can make the food look really flat. So kind of play around with those different angles of light and try to avoid using your flash. Most of the photos that you're going to see here are going to be either things that I photographed in a restaurant. This one was photographed actually on a rooftop. It just happened this weekend. I was on a rooftop out in California, and I had a nice like shade over me because I do not like the sun. If you can see it all, I have a little bit of a rosy nose right now. I got a little bit sunburned on my trip out there. So I was all nice and shaded, which gave like the perfect light for this dish. Plus, there was a lot of white light kind of bouncing back and reflecting from all the white elements on the table. But avoid a flash for a lot of reasons. The food photo is not going to look great, and you're also probably going to annoy people in the dining, you know, if you're in a dark, dim environment, you just don't want to have your flash popping off. And you also want to be kind of quick too, because everybody wants to eat their food as soon as it's served. All right, so surroundings, you kind of just want to be aware of what is around your photo or around your food. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on here. I probably would also have maybe some chopsticks if you know, I had them available, and they probably were there. I just didn't have them in a good spot. But you want things that are relevant to your food dish in your photo as much as possible. So here, the background has a lot of you know, there's a lot of dishes and things that we're eating, or you know, maybe a little sake cup back there. So just kind of be aware what you have, and you don't want it necessarily too cluttered. You just want to find that nice balance, and relevancy is really the biggest deal. Background is another really important thing when photographing food. I pay a lot of attention to my background, especially when I'm setting up shots at home when I'm doing my own food shoots. I'm always constantly moving things around. But when you're in a restaurant, you don't have that luxury, because you know, here there are a lot of other diners at this table. This was like a big family style meal. And so a lot of the things in the background were just there, and I had to live with them. However, they were very relevant to the scene, and I don't feel that they really take away from the food itself. I also really like that the glass of wine there on the left has wine in it. I've had some photos that I've taken just at restaurants when they were empty glasses, and just it looked like unfinished. It just didn't look quite right. And this is a good example of having a distracting element in the background versus a non-distracting element. This is a photo, this is photographed. I cooked up some burgers and they looked really delicious. And so I had some great light. I was covered under my gazebo outside. So I decided to get a quick photo. And there were some drinks in the background. Probably LaCroix. I drink a ton of LaCroix. And I had some koozies, and those koozies were bright red. So it's really pulling that eye away from the food. So I tried to kind of recompose. And the photo on the right, I did a touch of cropping, and I'm actually going to edit this photo once I jump into Luminar. So you'll get to see how, and all these photos here that you're seeing are actually unedited. So you're going to see how I actually transform them into like just adding a lot more color and just balancing things out in Luminar. But there's no red in that right side on that photo. So it just really focuses that attention to the food, instead of like wanting to kind of constantly draw your eye over to that red element in the scene. And here's another example. This is just a really quick snapshot of you know, an ice cream cone. And I think I took it inside at first, or sitting at a table, but I just didn't like the way it looked. So I found a really simple background to give it a lot more contrast and just simplify it. If you have a mobile phone, you probably have portrait mode. Some cameras are going to do better at portrait mode than others. Like if iPhone XR is a good example of one that really only lets you use it with people. So Android works as well. Android has its own version of portrait mode. And if you want to try to shoot raw with portrait, I'd recommend on iOS. I'm not sure if Rich, you probably know better than I would, that the Halide app, if it's I think it's only available on iOS.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's iOS only right now.
Yeah,
Ev
but
is
that's
in
a good
here too as well. I know he knows that app well. I'm pretty sure they're iOS for now, but there's more coming.
That would be awesome, because it allows you to shoot raw. So then if you really want to have control over those photos, you can, you know, edit them in raw. All the stuff I'm doing here is JPEG. You can edit on a JPEG inside of Luminar. So that's a fantastic feature. All right, we can go to the next slide, and I just have a few
it's
examples.
totally okay, Nicole. Like if people feel the need to download Lightroom Mobile for their mobile RAW camera, we're fine with that. We open those
Yeah.
DNG files too.
We all use a bunch of different apps, you know. I use a lot of different apps. And all right, so the next slide, if you go to jump to that next one, I just have a few examples of a kind of a before and after of a portrait mode. So on the left, I photographed this, obviously just standard regular photo. And on the right, I switched to that portrait mode. I had to kind of back up, and you know, the crop and the composition, the lens compression is a little bit different, but it just looks so much nicer by blurring that background. And this is an example of when kind of portrait mode goes wrong. I find that it has a difficult time with clear glass beverages. Yeah, like the plastic there, the straw gets really blurry and weird. On the right, the background of that glass just kind of just fades into nothingness, because portrait mode is obviously built more for people. But with a lot of food stuff, you can do a great job of kind of mimicking, you know, grabbing that out of focus background just by pretending. Sometimes, and just as a trick, usually what I have to do is I have to take my camera, and it always tells you to back up, back up, back up. So I pull back pretty far, and then as soon as the background pops out of focus, I slowly move forward and try to get a photo. It's kind of like a a little cat and mouse game. You really kind of have to try to catch it while it's out of focus, but you can get some really great results when you don't, when you're able to kind of, hack it, I guess. So you can jump to the next slide. So if you guys want to learn a little bit more about food photography, you can go to nicolez.me/food. That will bring you over to my blog, and it'll show you some, just like a bunch of blog posts about food photography and editing and things like that. So now if you jump over to the next slide, I'm about ready to jump into Luminar. And I wanted to talk a little bit briefly about why I use Luminar AI. So Luminar to me it's a tool that I use along with other applications. I use Lightroom and Photoshop. I like to use Luminar in conjunction with those two a lot of the time, but I also like to use Luminar from start to finish. So it works from start to finish, with RAW photos, with JPEG photos, and I think there's some other file types it works with well, but you can also use it as a plugin from other apps. It's not one of those things, where you have to use only one thing. Like I get a lot of questions about which software should I use? And, my answer is usually, well, you don't have to just choose one, but it's great when you can just kind of, you find the things that you love about Luminar. And there are definitely some things that I love about it. For example, the color cast removal tool, it's a slider within the color tool. That's probably one of my favorites with food. And there are a lot of features in Luminar that I just cannot quickly replicate with other apps. So I prefer to just jump in and out of Luminar if I need that one thing, or if I want to edit a photo from start to finish. And it's great for food photos too. So, and just super briefly, if you'll jump to the last slide there, Rich, I just wanted to share that I have a brand new, it was just released last month, a video course all about Luminar AI from start to finish. I show a lot of different photos, not only food photos. It's getting some really great reviews. If you guys are interested in learning Luminar from start to finish with I have a lot of short clip videos that'll walk you through every tool, every feature. Go ahead and check it out over in my Nicole Z store. So store.nicolez.com. Okay, now I'm actually going to jump into Luminar, and I'm going to show you guys some of the tips and some of the things that I like to do to edit my photos. So hopefully, cross your fingers, everyone, that Luminar works for me here. Do you see my screen with Luminar?
Yep, here we are. Yeah, we have your screen up.
Okay, cool. So I have a hamburger photo up. You guys are seeing that, just to clarify?
Yep, and you're in catalog view.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, I'm in the catalog here, and I have the info down there. This was taken with my Apple iPhone 11 Pro in portrait mode. So I'm going to share with you, I have about 10 minutes or so. I'm going to share with you guys some of the tools I use almost always with my food photos. So we'll start out, I'm in the edit panel right here. Enhance AI is just one of those tools that I use all the time with my photos. I like to see what it does. It usually is going to do a really good job of adding some contrast, a little bit of brightness, and it also kind of bumps that color up a little bit as a result. Composition AI, for this photo, what I want to do here is I want to kind of crop out that distracting element. So I'm going to take the corner from the top right and just drag in just a touch. I don't want to cut off too much of the burger here. It's just kind of clipping the edge of that lettuce, but that's okay. And then I'm finished with that. So I'm just going to collapse that composition panel. And now I kind of have that photo where that distracting element is no longer there. But another quick tip, and I'm going to jump back into composition, is if you go, this is great for food photos, when you photograph them kind of at this perspective where you're kind of like at a sitting level, when you're not overhead is a better way to describe it. So I'm just kind of showing the front of the food. If you go into that vertical slider and increase it by just maybe 1 or 2, I would go no more than 5 on this. It's going to, and it was a really subtle adjustment. So let me kind of show you before and after. If you notice that the food in the front is kind of pulling forward a little bit, I'll show this on another photo too, so you'll get a better feel for what it does. But that's a great tip to kind of help bring that food forward into the image. Or, so it's kind of like, it's one of those things you're not going to notice that someone did, but it just makes the photo look a lot better. Color, I love using the color tool, specifically the remove color cast slider. This thing is fantastic for food because a lot of times you're still going to implement a lot of kind of that yellow, kind of tungsten-y light in the photo. It doesn't, and I even photographed this in daylight. So, but if I toggle this off and on, you can see it's really doing a good job of cutting through and removing that color cast. Surprisingly enough, another really great tool for food is the landscape tool. If you go into that foliage enhancer and increase it to the right, you're going to add some nice saturation to those greens. And I like to have a lot of green elements in my food because it just adds brightness and freshness to the photos. So I just happen to have it. Now, this was not a styled photo shoot. This was just me literally making burgers for me and my boyfriend. And I was like, oh, this looks really pretty. I'm gonna take a picture. You know, that's basically how I get all of my food photos with my phones. And then of course, the last one.
That was a good tip, Nicole. That was a very good tip. That was a very good tip about the green.
Oh yeah, I use that one all the time. It's so great. And if you're a little afraid of the greens getting like kind of too like neon green, jump into the advanced settings there in that landscape tool, take that foliage hue and just move it to the left. And it'll kind of like, if you go to the right, you're going to get that weird green color. So I like to kind of subtract it a bit. And that adds a nice brightness to those areas.
And Nicole, before you leave that, I actually discovered something, and maybe you've already figured this out, but go down to our fun color harmony section at the bottom.
Yeah.
And if you take a look at the color contrast, open that tool up, move the amount up, but don't freak out. All right, so now move the hue slider over to the green zone and then tone down the color contrast, but it's targeting the contrast on just the green.
Oh, that's great. That's a great tip. Yeah, I didn't know that. I use the color contrast section a lot in the color harmony tool, but that's a really great tip. I'm going to leave that one there. I like that.
Yeah, there we go. I was playing with this the other day. I was actually just trying to make some trees pop, and I was like, wait a minute, let me shift that over. And I'm like, well, pine trees, lettuce, they're both kind of vegetables. One tastes better than the other.
So then I'll show you my last, I always joke that I use Mystical on a lot of my photos. It's just, and I think Rich, you were in the same boat. You love this tool as well. Bringing this up to usually somewhere between 20 and 30 is usually a pretty good, like balanced number without overdoing it. It just adds a little bit of contrast, a touch of glow. It's just a really great kind of polishing effect. So I'll do a quick before and after. And I'm going to jump real quickly into one more photo just to kind of re-emphasize a few of those tools that I use so you can see them a little bit clearer in a different image. So let's go over to this nice, beautiful sushi photo. Jump into that edit tab. So first I'm going to start out in the composition AI tool, and I'm going to go straight down to that vertical slider. Now you'll watch the bottom of the photo. And as I do this, I'm going to move it pretty far. I'm not going to go this far to, finish, but you can see how it's really pulling that plate closer to the front. So if I just set this at 4, and then I'll just toggle this off and on, you can see it's really moving that front of that food closer to the front of the image. And it's a great way to just add a little bit of enhancement. And then the color tool, again, this is a great example because I did photograph this indoors. I didn't have a lot of natural light. I still felt the light quality looked good, but it's a little bit yellow. So if I take that remove color cast slider and push that to the right, I'll toggle that off and on. It's really bringing back a lot of the natural color, bringing some of that blue, kind of covering up some of the yellowish tones with more of a blue cast, which is ideal for this image. I'll jump up to Enhance AI. And we'll see what that does. And this adds a lot of brightness to the photo. There's no green in it, so I can skip those other tools, but I will jump into the vignette and add a super quick vignette here. So I'm just going to drop it pretty low just to start. I like to see the vignette when I'm working with it, but I also like to jump into the advanced settings, and I like to add a touch of inner light. But one thing you might notice is that the entire vignette is kind of emanating from the very center of the frame. So because a lot of my food photos, I have this subject in the bottom third of the image, I'm going to click that choose subject button and then go over to the food area and click it. And now everything shifts down. So the top area is darker. Let me toggle that off and on. And then I can reduce that amount a touch. Doesn't really look like there's much of a vignette there, but if I toggle that off and on, you can see it is really making a good effect. And just for fun, let's go down to Mystical and add a touch of that Mystical to really give it a good finishing result. And there's that before and after. When I edit food photos, I'm not usually making crazy big dramatic changes, but each little thing that I do inside of Luminar AI, it really helps to kind of build up that perfect look for the photo and just cleans it up. I really like clean, bright colorful, vibrant, tasty looking food images. So that's always what I'm going for when I'm editing them inside of Luminar. And that's all I got for you guys.